My name is John Zielinski, and I began an odyssey, most strange, in 1984, when, as the publisher of Iowa Heritage Books, I had my 7th printer go pirate. Now, I found this laughable since I held all proper registrations, copyright, International Standard Book Number, Library of Congress card catalog number, newspaper and magazine articles about me as author and publisher of a line of Iowa Heritage Books, and yet, in the course of nearly 6 years, I was to lose in the Court of Appeals Court and in the Supreme Court, based, I'm told, by my state senator Richard Varn, on the sovereign power granted to judges. He said this: judges have sovereign power and may not be questioned as to their conduct or as to their judgment except by other judges. Now, in the case of Nebraska, I said to Senator DeCamp, this is the biggest cover-up since the Kennedy assassination. He held up his hand and said, no, John, this is a far bigger cover-up than the Kennedy assassination. And what this film is about is our continued efforts to wake the American people up about what's happening to their children in every community across this country. Now, along with Ted Gunderson, I investigated the occult. Along with Senator DeCamp, I obtained the various documents he obtained that the Nebraska legislature obtained. He spent 16 years in the Nebraska unicameral, was good friends with Loren Schmidt. Senator Loren Schmidt headed up the Franklin investigation. So what we're trying to do here is get you to pay attention. When my film showed in 2011 at the True Falls Film Festival, I had a lot of pats on the back, and go for it, good luck. And I'm saying, the job is not mine. I have the job of informing you of what's going on. If you want your children to be safe, then I suggest to you that you take some action. You hold committee meetings, you talk to politicians. And by the way, I have done all of this. Tom Harkin recently commended some new legislation to protect the chimpanzees. They're going to stop using them for medical experiments. Yet I handed, more than 20 years ago, Tom Harkin information on the Boys Town and the fact that children were being kidnapped to be used for sexual purposes, to be used in medical experiments, to be sacrificed to Satan. And Tom Harkin never got back to me, never did anything. Chuck Grassley, and as you see, these are both Iowa senators, but Claire McCaskill here in Missouri has also heard from me. I've sat down with one of her employees here in Columbia, Missouri, and gone over this. Now, we need to take action to protect the children of America. I don't know of anyone who has put himself more forward than Senator John DeCamp. And it's my thought that the more DeCamp I can put on, the more you will come to understand what is happening to children. And in the case of John DeCamp, he was with the Crozier Fathers in Minnesota until about 15 or 16, and then at Boys Town. And his original intention was to be a priest. He turned out to be a politician with the sensitivity and moral standard of what you would expect of a priest, while many of the priests at Boys Town were far below that level. He wrote a book called The Franklin Cover-Up, and it has sold nearly 500,000 copies, and yet today many people in the area of Nebraska where he lives don't know anything about the fact that more than 3 million children have disappeared or been murdered on the streets of this country in the last 30 years since he began talking about the Franklin cover-up in Nebraska. And I told him, you should have said, in America. And that is exactly what I'm going to be doing with my book, Nightmare in America. And I will follow that with one on Satanism, and then I will follow that with Conspiracy of Silence, the rest of the story. And Conspiracy of Silence was a video done by Yorkshire Broadcast about Boys Town, about children being prostituted. It was scheduled to air on the Discovery Channel. It featured not only John DeCamp, but some of the young people, one of which, Paul Bonassi, helped to kidnap Johnny Gosch. And it told the true story of Boys Town boys being put into Offutt Air Force Base for training as prostitutes, and how between the CIA, the FBI, and the military, the information was used to blackmail senators and congressmen. So I urge you to pay attention to John, and I will have new things by him and old things by him as fast as I can recover them. I've been to Nebraska. I've got something in excess of 100 videos of various kinds, a few DVDs and so on. I have audio interviews with children done by Gary Caradore, who ended up dead in this whole thing. So I'm hoping that this will spread a little light. And don't let it stop with you. Turn to your friends and say, have you seen this? Pay attention to this. We've got to do something about this. Again, John Zielinski here, author, publisher, videographer, narrator, and I'll be doing a series of books that will curl your toes. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, all right.
I said, you know, if I really believed any of this, I'd be the first one to investigate and do something about it using my position as a senator or whatever. And then I got these letters from some of these kids saying, who had been picked up and locked up when the people that abused them should have been the ones locked up. And they said, their letter from jail to me, and said if I would come look at their secret file, their secret stuff they kept, I'd know they were telling the truth. And I did. And
have you kept those diaries and other things, or did they go back to the ones that...
I think they're in my files. I think I've copied them at a minimum.
No.
If I were to take you right now to where all my files start and go, you'd be another 70 years older by the time you got through them.
Okay, but here's one thing I wanted to ask. If you have what is called a curriculum vitae, a thing of all of the things that have happened to you. I gave you my timeline, which is my best way of saying that. I had some awards and other things in the past, but I'd like to have all of that, and I'd like for you to think about one thing. Maybe I should be writing your story.
That might be a good idea, because I'll never get it done. I'll say tomorrow I'll start on it.
Yeah.
And then a week later, my wife will say something like, so how's your story coming? And I say, oh, I didn't get going on it. You stupid man. You know, my wife's a little Vietnamese refugee.
Yes.
So she kind of has that way of talking. Here, stupid man, see? He talk, he never do. Just talk. He's stupid man.
The thing is, you, Ted, if I do so say so, me, as the biggest mouth around. I mean, I have kept on pounding at women's groups and so on. I put out thousands of those sheets with Martin Luther King on it and saying, okay, woman's group, have me come and talk. I have yet to find one to do so. In the film, which I'm going to make copies for you, it's me with the League of Women Voters presenting members of the legislature from the Iowa City area, and I'm up there telling him about the Franklin case.
Yes.
And I said that I gave information to Richard Varn, and he was the one who said to me, judges have sovereign power and may not be questioned as to their conduct or as to their judgment except by other judges. Now, I had another legislator say, we don't have anything to do with what judges do except to raise their salaries. Now, how is the legislature part of a check and balance if that's the way two of the state senators feel about judges? Have you felt or encountered this idea that a judge is God and you cannot question God? This is what an attorney told me tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I guess unless you find another God to be of a higher position, so to speak,
but
that can challenge the God.
the thing is
But
that,
otherwise, they're a system of gods.
yes, when I took my case...
I've never heard it phrased that way, but
Well,
you've just kind of restated what's obvious.
yeah. When I took my
That's pretty
case,
good.
in the case of the piracy of my entire life's work, with a judge dismissing every national and international registration,
Yeah.
that was when, in 1990, I woke up and I published a newspaper called the Uncensored Iowan, because I felt the Daily Iowan was censored, and Bill Casey was head of it then as publisher.
Yes.
And he said some very nasty things about me. F you, you crazy bastard, you belong in the psych hospital. And that quote was said to me at the old Capitol in Iowa City when not Barnes and Noble, but B. Dalton was there. And what did I have in my hand? A copy of the Franklin cover-up. And I was saying, see, Bill, I told you what was going on. You see me on the film, when you watch Zelensky, you'll see me handing him a tape, which he promised to get back to me on. That was the WHO Talk Radio Des Moines broadcast that got me.
Maybe we'll get to do a lot of heavier talking, and maybe out of it will come, I'll get back involved in doing some of this, since I'm kind of trying to retire now and quit all my legal stuff and all my other business stuff, and maybe we'll open up the can of worms again, and maybe even put the can of worms out there where more people can kill the worms and save the things they're eating.
What is now happening is, I said, I was treated for many years as some kind of nutcase by saying this kind of stuff was going on. But what is now happening is the young people know that things are wrong. They are born to the internet. My son is at home on the internet. And so when I
told
say,
you my experience, I have to learn from my 7-year-old granddaughter how to run a stupid computer.
Well,
wait, I'm the stupid one.
when I say, I probably told 10,000 people now, at least, FranklinCase.org, watch Conspiracy of Silence. You've said you probably put 10,000 copies of that out.
Oh, at least.
And people have to begin to recognize that this is going on. Now, I want one thing.
Now I've put 10,000 out from this office. We get letters and we mail them out a copy. I just send a copy. But I would guess there's been 3 or 4 times that many of them out there, because I get letters from people and they'll say, or calls, is it okay if we copy and give these to other people? I say, hell, copy all you want.
Yes, and that's exactly what I said about all and everything I have done. And it is to the point where I had crowds of people show up for the film Zelensky, as it was shown in the True Falls Film Festival in Columbia, Missouri. And people were patting me on the back, shaking my hand, and I'm saying, look, if you believe what I'm saying there, it's up to you to carry on this. And what is happening is I'm plastered all over the internet. I have somebody stop me in the street with their camcorder and they interview me, and then they put it on YouTube. And so me 20 years ago, I'm on YouTube. Me today, I'm on YouTube. This thing is YouTube equipped. If I want to do a segment, I just flip out the little side thing, plug it into a computer, and download it right to YouTube. And I might do that with selections of this.
Let's
But-
get together again and
Well,
Let's-
let me see what cages I can rattle. Now, I wanted
I
one thing.
understand.
Bill Casey,
Colby.
no. Bill Colby told you, I believe, that yes, sometimes the CIA does authorize the kidnapping of kids.
He absolutely made that very clear because he explained it to me further later on, and we'll go into that in depth because I pursued it with him, and Bill was very straight with me because he felt he had a bit of an obligation to correct the things where they'd gone off to the too far one direction, even though they were well-intentioned, as he explained it always at the time, well-intentioned. You were using, so to speak, a wrong to expose and correct a much eviler wrong and sin. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
And he says, we're learning, I can still remember this, he says, and I remember when I was a little boy, he told me one time, he says, when I was a little boy, he said, my mother used to say, just two wrongs don't make a right. And he said, I remember that, and I'm finding out now it's more true even than I thought as a 7-year-old, that when we decide we have to cheat and have a right to violate the rules, whether we're FBI or CIA, or we have a right to kill somebody or do somebody in because they're evil anyway, or that's serving a good purpose, it doesn't work that way. Two wrongs don't make a right. And he says, we're learning it, and I'm sure learning it, and he was trying to help correct it, then expose
Yes.
it in his old age.
and what
His old age wasn't that old when he got drowned or
What
killed.
what I have said is that what I got out of that came out of the Why Johnny Can't Come Home book, when Noreen, who was afraid to reveal it in the book, knew that her husband was a pedophile and had gone after little girls wherever he was in the country. And apparently at one point he got caught. And he called home and he said, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to commit suicide. And she called the police and everything, and they went to his hotel room. He was clear across the United States. And then he came home, and nothing more was said of it. And a few weeks later, he said, I'm going to Offutt Air Force Base. And he took his son Johnny with him.
Yes.
And what Noreen says is, for a boy who would have been excited about going, Johnny was 12 years old, he could almost not remember. Oh, the planes. He didn't have any exciting stories to tell about being at Offutt at all, and we both wondered if Johnny had been drugged and somehow tested during the time he was there and then later scheduled for kidnapping. Now, I had an unusual experience in that I knew where to get the government documents. We have a government document section at the University of Iowa Library. And I went in and copied the congressional record from when Noreen was testifying, and she was talking about the fact that the FBI introduced book after book that had all kinds of children's pictures in them, and many of those children had not been kidnapped. And it was like a catalog that you could pick from. And what I noted was, I go in, I make copies, I pay for them, and they become bad debt. The university did that 5 or 6 times, and held all of my records in abeyance over a 20-year period by claiming that I'd amassed all these bad debts, when I was actually going in and paying at the copy center for the copies of books or the pages from books that I was copying. And I only caught it because they did that so quickly after I did the copy, $66 and something, for the stuff that I was doing for Noreen Gosh, researching and stuff, that I knew that I had paid for it and that I had a receipt and so on. And I raised hell for years, and finally one of the people in the department that handles this bad debt stuff went and researched them and knocked every one of those major charges off. And then I only owed $141 in parking fees, which I got even when I parked in a totally empty parking lot at the law building, because all of my lawyers had turned tail and run, and I was trying to research something. And this was during recess, and there were like 3 parking spaces where you could put money in, and the rest of the lot was empty. I still was ticketed. And the police there, the campus safety officer, went with Bill Casey 100% of the time, even when I had videotape showing him ranting and raving and me simply quietly asking him for a few minutes of his time. And you know, that's what makes that video so good, because Bill Casey is there shouting to my cameraman, "You know this guy, he's crazy." Now, I should have been afforded some respect by Bill Casey,
Yes, I know.
because at that time I had done over 10 books. I had done Portrait of Iowa with Paul Engel of the Writers' Workshop. Year after year, I had produced a new book on some aspect of life in Iowa. And yet here I was being treated like a piece of dirt and saying I was a troublemaker, and I shouted and I cursed, and I said, "Bill, I don't even use language like that." And yet his say-so was sufficient that when I went to the head of the School of Journalism about my being forbidden from even entering the journalism school during an entire year, he shrugged and indicated that he couldn't do anything against Bill Casey. And that whole thing stinks of the pedophile activity that I was hearing about on the university. So I think we're talking about a nationwide ring of pedophiles. And I noticed in the book from Pennsylvania, we're talking about the president here at the University of Nebraska and other people associated with him being tied into people out there. And I see no reason to think that that's not the same thing at the University of Iowa. And I had documentation that the university was receiving millions of dollars from the Pentagon and the CIA. And it wasn't specified what it was for, but it is my understanding that it was investigation of mind control drugs with students being used.
CL, can I call you later? Okay. I promise I will. I'll call you later this morning. Bye-bye.
Okay, it didn't turn off anyway, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to get together another time when I get this letter ready and everything else, we can do a hell of a lot more. I can see that.
The thing is that you're the right person. You've been in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
I'm just a journalist, and a journalist that had enough experience, had enough publishing, that should have been listened to. And I don't ever go
And I just wonder whether I should go back into the eye of the storm again.
Well, but
I wonder.
you don't have to be in the eye of the storm if you're simply the one that gives me all the information and I write it in a book. Now, I am writing American Genocide of the New McCarthyism. And because I've talked to you and because I've thought it over, I had a design for the cover of my book, which was going back to an old map before Columbus, when they had little monsters drawn.
Yes.
And saying that there are monsters here.
Yes.
And I was going to do a typographical map of the United States. But I decided that should go inside the book in the front center, and the front cover will be America's MIA children with the red and the blue for the children and the white around it, and the statement that more than 3 million children have disappeared and or been murdered on the streets of this country in the last 30 years. Now, let me give you a speculation. We're getting an awful lot of so-called crazy people that are going out and shooting a bunch of people.
Yes.
Now, are you at all familiar with Kathy O'Brien and the book called The Transformation of America?
Yes.
Well, the thing that I got is that she was so mind controlled that when she was rescued, she had no idea of where she had come from or what she had been. And that another lady, and we put this in the book, at Noreen's assistance, had been a little girl when she was purchased by Bob Hope, who traded her off to military officers. And I often wondered how Bob Hope kept for so many years doing all the USO shows and then having them put on television, etc. And this particular story I wouldn't have run myself in the book, but Noreen insisted on putting it in. And then when I was fighting her, because we had agreed that once the cost was met, it was $10,000 to print the book, I was to receive 1/3 and she was to receive 2/3 from the book. And yet I did the whole thing. She couldn't write her way out of a paper bag, and she gave me a 3 or 4 page, basically, here's the story. And when I sat down with her and I said, and what happened when you went to this particular school and spoke? What happened here? What happened there? And I drew out of her incident after incident after incident. I can do the same thing with you. And fleshed out a story of strength. And what I'm saying is, I don't know how much longer I have left.
I understand.
I don't know how much longer you
Remember,
have left.
we're only a couple months apart.
Yes.
But you just touched on something that's most important of all. Okay, you said, what was I going to say? I had it all in my head when you were talking there, because you touched on something super important about, what I learned from Colby, and about particularly this no memory thing, of this individual or that individual. One day they're here and you can talk to them just as normal as anything, and completely different person almost. When I brought this up to him, this issue of basically dual personalities or whatever, because one of the first things that happened in my getting involved in this was this high-priced psychiatrist. What was her name? Judy Ann, I think?
Denson Gerber.
She was the one brought in by the authorities then to investigate Paul Benassi, and see if he's crazy with these stories. And when she came up with her conclusions, I went in, she was coming out of the jail one time after talking to him, and I said, the kid's called my bluff, and I've got to, if he's even slightly sane, I suppose I've got to help him and try to represent him. I said, is he just completely crazy? She said, no, he's not crazy. I said, well, what do you mean? He can't be telling the truth. Oh, he's telling the absolute truth. I said, but sometimes his stories seem to conflict. And she said, yes, that might be. I said, well, how can you say he's telling the truth then? He says, because he's a dual personality, he's a multiple personality. And I found this is one of the key components of so much of this stuff. That multiple personality and how to create them in young people particularly. And it had come out of the Korean War.
Excuse me. No.
I don't know where it came out of,
It
but I
came
know.
out
But we
of-
were the ones,
Yeah.
Americans started discovering it big time into how it was used in the Korean War to
It came out
brainwash soldiers or
of
something.
Nazi Germany. When Adolf Hitler realized that the Satanic cults knew how to create multiple personalities. And there are several good books on this, and it amounts to this. You take a little girl or a little boy and you put them in a closet and it's filled with spiders, or you put them in a closet and it's filled with snakes. and you leave them in there overnight, the personality split off. Now, I was actually at a seminar, if you will, in Des Moines, Iowa. My friend Russ Kaysen, who used to be a Polk County deputy sheriff, brought this woman in from Florida who used to be fairly high up in the Satanic. And she was addressing people in the room when all of a sudden she wasn't the same person.
She became a different person. Something
And-
triggered that. I
and
had that
it-
happen with Paul Benassi one time.
It was a spider crawling across the table, and she'd been one subjected to the spider thing. And about 10 minutes later, she goes, "God, I have a headache. Did something happen?" She had no recall. Now,
See,
Kathy
you even
O'Brien.
say these things, people think you're crazy. Yes, I know Kathy O'Brien.
Well, Kathy O'Brien said that they use Disney symbols to trigger them, and it amounts to this. You're Joe so-and-so. You are a clerk in a store someplace. Somebody comes in and says, "Donald Duck said to," and you go out and you get a weapon and you go out and shoot somebody and you drop the weapon in the river, and you never remember that you ever did anything like that. And what I'm saying is, we brought out of Europe Joseph Mengele,
Yes.
and he was put in charge of some of those experiments, and so was Michael Aquino. He was Captain Michael Aquino when he paid $6,000 to the kidnappers in Sioux City, Iowa, and took Johnny with him.
Yes, and you know that
And then
I had the debate set up with him.
Yes.
And when he found out I was really going to be there and had come all the way out to California and was waiting there at the radio station where we were to do he skipped.
Yes, and I said that Michael Aquino is the only non-general that I know who was sent to the Command and Staff College at Fort Leavenworth and on to the War College in Washington, D.C. And it was obvious that he was extremely influential. It was said that Ronald Reagan wanted him to come to one of his parties in full satanic regalia because he founded the Church of Set inside the military. And what is significant is that he continued to climb in rank even though there were allegations of the sexual abuse of children and other things like that. And the Sharon Tate murders, Manson. Gunderson thought that Manson was CIA assassin and that he had actually penetrated Gunderson's house. That was when Gunderson said, "I decided to stay overnight someplace else. But my partner's wife and children were there and they hid in a closet, and he stayed all night and left in the morning because I wasn't there." And Gunderson has said he believes several times they set up to assassinate him. And as I told you, I was involved in the Linda Wiegand case, and Gunderson told me to get the hell out of Connecticut when I was there trying to help. And he later said that this was the worst case of judicial corruption that he had ever seen. And the boys were able to testify on camera to having been sexually abused by the father and stepfather. And yet nothing was ever done to him. And Linda was imprisoned for a length of time, and this is what happened. She was charged with child support even as she fled with her own child from her first marriage and her son from that marriage. And during the time she hid out in Las Vegas, the judge ruled that she owed $500,000 in child support to her husband, who'd already taken over her house, and her bank account had been confiscated. And when he said, "Are you going to pay that money now?" She said, "I don't have any money, I'm broke."
Yes.
They said, "We're going to put you in jail on contempt charges." And when she was brought out after a month, he said, "Are you going to recant your testimony?" No. She ended up in the women's prison on death row with a death row inmate. And these are all things that she described to me. She said, "At one point I put my tea bag down in the wrong place and the woman nearly beat me to death. She'd murdered her own brother." And when Bo got, through his radio program, Bo Wrights, got enough people, the recorder just went off, they got enough people to petition that they got her released. One of the guards called him and said, "Don't let her come back to this prison because she will never leave it alive." And we're talking about a mother who was simply charged with taking her own children when she had legal custody of them.
Well aware of this case, yes.
And what I'm saying is these things are so entangled all the way across the country.
I know.
That the newspaper clip I gave you suggests that every place from Holland to Boston to the Kansas City area has the involvement of pedophiles and pedophile activity.
Yep. Okay, we'll have
Okay.
another 100 long talks soon, I'm sure.
And what, if there is some way, financially, I'm $635 is what I get every month in Social Security. I'm in a, what do they call it, a Section 8, so they pay for part of my rent on an apartment. I lived in a trailer that I bought for $100 for more than 6 years. And I barely could pay the $170 plus electricity and other things like that. In the summertime, I had to go without air conditioning and go to the library when it was 100 some degrees. And I had rigged up a special air conditioner in the bedroom with a duct that ducted over the bed so that I would turn it on at night when I needed to sleep and I'd have a cool place to sleep, but otherwise not. Now, this apartment has got me something. If we can work together at some point in the fall or winter, if you can find me some place that I can stay, that I don't, as I said, when I did the book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, I had just sold a home in Leavenworth, and I had $10,000 in the bank, and I spent $7,000 of it with Noreen Gulch. And it just seems like every time I help someone, boom,
Yeah.
I've got a problem.
Let me do some checking and thinking and might come up with some ideas.